Hey there, thanks for checking out this lesson in which we'll look at what I think are 3 of the most difficult parts in Stash. First, I'll show you how each part goes, then I'll give you some tips on how to nail each one. Along the way, we'll check out some technique as well as some music theory that hopefully you'll find useful. The first section that we're going to look at here that I thought was pretty difficult in this song is actually the main theme, and it comes in pretty quickly after the intro. What I'm going to do here is just play through it kind of slowly and then offer some tips that I think might be helpful if you're having a hard time playing through this part. Now, my first tip here to make this a little easier to get down is to, even though this is a small section, break it down into even smaller parts. And so let's break this into 3 separate sections. Here's the first. Let me do that even slower. Now, the second section is really similar. It's going to go like this. That's a tough little part right there because your pinky finger is doing all this sliding, but it also has to change strings, and toward the end of that a little bit, we're jumping strings, so there's a lot going on, and this is, again, why this smaller section helps. You can really zero in on the technique needed here. So here it is again, section 2. Now section 3 is the last little bit. I'm just going to choose the first ending. Just know that the second ending is almost the same. It just has a little variation. Okay, so here it is, section 3. Okay, again, there's a little slide from 9 to 10 on B. So let me recap those 3 sections. Part 1, 2, three, I wouldn't put those 3 together like that until I felt very confident that I could play each one of those on its own. Now, everybody's got a different pace. You may have an easier time playing that. Those slides may come more naturally to you, and you may not need to break it down into 3 pieces. Maybe you break it down into 2. Maybe you do it in one go. But at any rate, I have found that working with smaller sections in general is very helpful. Now, the next tip I have for you that's been really helpful for me learning these songs is to really slow things down. I practice really, really slowly at first, little sections in a really repetitive manner. So this might be how I would do the first 3 sections. I'll just leave like a little pause in between each one. Okay, so something like that. Now, adjust it to your needs, but the idea is just to take it slow. The next tip I have here is to really hone in on what your right hand is doing and how you're picking this part, because if you do things in a little bit of a different order than what I'm going to suggest, you definitely could play this, but it might make things more difficult. And the reason for that is inside picking versus outside picking. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about here, what I mean is that if you were to take your pick and you wanted to pick the B string and then the E string back and forth, just B, E, B, E, B, E. Outside picking would have you start on a down with your B string, followed by an up with your E string, and you would just continue that, alternating. What this does is it allows you to avoid getting your pick in between those two strings. Your margin for error is very large, because even if I do like a way bigger down or bigger up, it's all good because I'm outside of the string. I'm not in this really restricted area. Now, on the other end of that, if I pick the same two strings but start with an up on the B string and then do a down on the E string, now you can get a sense for how quickly your margin for error has narrowed, like quite a bit. Actually, I think that this is probably the root of a lot of issues that people might have trying to play these songs that Trey wrote. Here's what I mean. Like every time you do that slide down and back up, maybe think about following that next note up after the slide with an up. So I'm trying to kind of exaggerate my motion so you can see it. Down, up, down, slide, up, down. Now that allows you to jump all the way down to that G. That is really the crux of it, is that string hopping thing. You know, it's much easier with that outside picking than inside picking, to me. Now I'm going to play the next section that I thought was really tricky to learn in this song, and it's kind of like right leading into the verse. I'll play it really slowly, and then we'll take a deeper dive into it. Now let's take a second to look at the same three tips here that we did in the other section, more or less. The first of which was to break it down into smaller pieces, and so we'll do that. This one's a longer section in general, so my little parts that I'm going to break this into will be a little larger than the last, part one. Now the next part goes like this. Again. Now the third section is this diminished run. Here it is again. Now I kind of already did this. I combined the first two tips together, really. I played it slowly and broke it up into 3 different sections. I'm going to do it one more time, even slower than what I think is already kind of slow. Another thing that I think will be really helpful with this part in particular is to make a connection between the melody that you're playing and what the chords are that are underneath and being implied here. Now, Trey obviously is playing the lead part, or the melody here, and isn't strumming along. So these chords I'm about to share are my best approximation of what I think Mike and Paige are doing. So take it with a grain of salt, but this should be in the ballpark here. So the first little bit sounds like a G minor. And if you connect it to what we're playing during that part, it kind of makes sense. You've got a G minor. Now our run starts on a B flat, which is the minor third of a G, and then it goes chromatically down to the root, which is G. A lot of times if you can sneak in a little chromaticism, it goes a long way. And it's just so beautiful. So that's the first little bit. Then we go to an F chord. You could argue that it's an F major 7 because he's going to hit an E at the end. Now what this part is we start on the A, if you think about what's happening there, you know, if you take an F major pentatonic kind of thing, you know, just take like a little simple thing like that. We're basically, again, having a little bit of chromaticism. And then we skip the flat 9 and go right to the root, which is F. And then he hits that E, which is the major 7th of F. So it could be an F major 7. Okay, now, after this part we just played, now it sounds like there's an E diminished chord. More on that in a second. Now what he's playing over that is... Now, this is an interesting one. Diminished chords are very ambiguous. You know, I really think that all chords are quite ambiguous. I did a video a long time ago called Chordal Ambiguity, and I explain what I mean by that in more detail in that video if you're interested. But for now, you know, for diminished, just know that when you play a diminished chord, you really can go quite a few different ways, you know, from that point. And certain things may or may not be implied by that chord, especially depending on what the melody is doing. Now, if we analyze what the melody is playing there, you know, what is that if you play a G, an E, a C sharp, and an A? Now, I'm going to give it a second for you to think about that. Maybe pause the video and ask yourself, what is that? Now, if you've unpaused and you're like, I have no idea, or if you figured it out, you know, it's an A7 arpeggio. Now, this is really important because the chord that comes right after that is a D minor, and A7 is the dominant chord. It's the 5th of D minor. Now, the key that we're getting all these chords from and all this stuff we're playing is essentially the key of F major or D minor. I've done other videos on the Barry Harris school of thought, the 6th diminished scale. Implications are really, really big here. But long story short, because I don't want to get too in the weeds on that, what the 6th diminished scale gives you is a dominant chord that leads from your kind of mixolydian position. In this key, it would be a C7 to the tonic, which is F. Or, you know, if we're doing it as D minor, then it gives you an A7, amongst other variations of that A7, which we'll see in a second, which is the dominant chord that leads you to the relative minor of our key, which is D minor. Long story short, that A7 is the perfect chord to lead our ears back to D minor, which is exactly where we're going next. Let me recap first, though. We have, maybe play along with when I'm doing this, you'll hear, and then F is, now here's this E diminished, which is really A7, and then, now that is just a D minor arpeggio. It's an inversion. It goes from the F, which is the minor 3rd, to the root, to the 5th. Okay, then we do this run where we go like that. Now, Mike Gordon is playing a C sharp during this part, but I really think the way he's thinking of that, or I shouldn't say that, I have no idea what Mike Gordon is thinking, but it seems like he's implying an A7 chord here as well, and probably more specifically an A7 kind of flat 9 variety. Well, not that the bass is necessarily implying that, but Trey is from his note choices. At least in a second we'll see that. So if you were to continue this from the D minor, you could do a C sharp diminished like this, and then it sounds like he kind of goes down to an A, and eventually we have this B flat over here toward the end that's implied in our melody, and it resolves back, you know, to a D minor when we go back to the lick. So here's that whole section. The rhythm's a little different, but you get the idea. Now, the reason that I'm saying that A7 chord is really an A7 flat 9 is because that is what that diminished sound is. I would really try to train yourself to hear diminished and then see, okay, what dominant chord can I connect that to? So when you hear, to me that screams A7 flat 9. It's cool because Trey's starting on a B flat, which is very tense. You know, he's starting with the flat 9, which is so cool. Now take this last little run. Let's look at that. Now let's change 2 notes. All right. So instead of a B flat here and here, we play 2 B flats in this run. Change those into A's, and what do you get? You get an A7. If we put a B flat in there, we get an A7 flat 9 kind of vibe. It's really, you know, it's diminished, but you know, those two are kind of one and the same. And it leads us back to our D minor really well once we go back to it. So, long story short, it really, you know, if you have the time to, I know it's a lot just learning how the song goes, but try to connect the melody that you're playing with the chords that are being played under it, and you get a lot of info out of that on the harmony being played, things that might work well, things that may not work well, and everything in between. The third section here that I thought was really difficult in learning this song was what's going on in the first part of the bridge. It actually happens throughout the bridge quite a bit, but if we just look at the first one, it gives us the template. It's the main motif. Now, before we play it, one thing that might be kind of strange about this part, if you're not familiar with playing in different time signatures, is that this one is in 5/4. It is for a while until it goes back to more of the main theme part. You know, it kind of goes back and forth a little bit, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. 5/4, you know, can feel really strange and unnatural and stuff. I would even say that when I was learning this song, I wasn't sitting there counting in 5/4 playing this. It wasn't until I went to write the transcription out and really analyze it that I realized it was in 5/4. I think that a lot of times it's more of a natural thing to just get the feel of it and just play to it and not overthink it. Now, if you're not able to do that, if that's not something that's coming naturally, then counting can be really, really helpful. So I just wanted to point out that there's a little bit of a different thing going on here for the time signature. Up to this point, we were just in 4/4, which is probably the most natural feeling time signature you could be playing in. So here's the part that I wanted to look at. I'm not actually going to get into that part right now. Now, let's take a closer look at this funky 5/4 section. Let's apply the same few tips that we've been using for the other sections to this one. We're going to break it into smaller sections. And for this one, because it's such a shorter part, I'm just going to do 2 sections. And then at the same time, I'm going to play it really slowly. That would be the first part I would look at. Now, it isn't clear all the time if Trey is doing this slide down with the pinky finger on 10 of D down to 9. I'll show you what I mean here in the beginning. Right there. Sometimes it sounds like he's sliding down. I think he means to. And then sometimes you don't hear it. You can decide what you want to do with that, but here it is again. Now, if I were to count in 5/4 for this section, here's how it would go. You would go 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 5 E and a... It's a great exercise. It might be worth doing. Now, here's the second section. Again. Now, if I were to count those 2 smaller sections in 5/4, here's what that would be like. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 5E and a. Thank you so much for watching the lesson. I hope you found it helpful, and please let me know if you can think of any other songs that you'd like me to break down in the same way. I'll see you next time.